Most people don't lose because they're unintelligent. They lose because they're playing a game they don't even realize they're playing. Think about it. Have you ever walked away from a conversation and thought, I should have said something different? Have you ever accepted a job that looked perfect, only to realize months later that it was quietly draining your life? Or maybe you've stayed in a relationship, not because it made you happy, but because leaving felt more frightening than staying. If you're honest, those moments weren't accidents. They were decisions. And every decision was made by a version of you that didn't fully understand the game. Put your headphones on, because these truths work quietly. This isn't just about a book. It's about the hidden patterns controlling your mind. You're listening to Listen Beyond. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people overlook. Life doesn't reward the person who works the hardest. It doesn't reward the smartest person. It doesn't even reward the most talented. Life rewards the person who sees what everyone else misses. That's strategy. And almost nobody thinks strategically anymore. We live in a world that worships speed. Faster answers, faster success, faster money, faster entertainment. Everything around you whispers the same message. React now. Reply immediately. Buy immediately. Choose immediately. Judge immediately. Outrage immediately. The modern world doesn't train thinkers. It trains reactors. And that's exactly why so many intelligent people wake up one day wondering, how did I end up here? Because they weren't making decisions. They were responding to momentum. Have you ever noticed this? Someone says something rude online, and thousands of people instantly argue. The stock market drops, people panic. A trend appears, everyone follows it. A headline spreads fear, millions believe it before asking a single question. It's fascinating, not because people are irrational, but because the human brain was never designed for the world we live in today. Thousands of years ago, quick reactions kept us alive. Hear a sound in the bushes? Run. See danger? Fight. Notice movement? Pay attention immediately. Speed meant survival. But today's threats aren't lions. They're distractions. Algorithms, endless notifications, breaking news, comparison, social pressure. And yet, our ancient brain still reacts as if every notification is life or death. Think about your average day. How many decisions are actually yours? You wake up, and before your feet touch the floor, your phone tells you what to think. Someone else's opinion, someone else's success, someone else's emergency, someone else's outrage. Before you've even spoken your first word, your attention belongs to someone else. And attention is the most valuable currency you'll ever own. Because where attention goes, your future quietly follows. And this is where most people destroy themselves. Not through one catastrophic mistake, but through thousands of tiny unconscious decisions. Checking the phone instead of reading. Choosing comfort instead of growth. Reacting instead of observing. Speaking instead of listening. Following instead of questioning. Individually, these decisions seem harmless. Together, they become a life. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something disturbing. Most people believe they're making choices, but they're mostly repeating patterns. Patterns inherited from parents, patterns copied from friends, patterns programmed by advertising, patterns reinforced by social media. Very little is actually intentional. Imagine watching a chess match. A beginner looks at the board and sees pieces. A strategist looks at the same board and sees possibilities. Threats, sacrifices, hidden opportunities, future consequences. The board never changed. Only the perspective did. Life works exactly the same way. Two people experience the same event. One sees disaster. The other sees information. One sees rejection. The other sees redirection. One sees failure. The other sees feedback. Same event, different mind, different future. Because the real problem was never on the surface. The real problem is that most people confuse reacting with thinking. They're not the same thing. Reaction is emotional. Thinking is intentional. Reaction asks, how do I feel right now? Strategy asks, where does this lead 5 moves from now? That's a completely different question, and it produces a completely different life. In my own reflection on this pattern, I've noticed something almost unsettling. The people who seem lucky rarely rely on luck. What looks like luck is usually preparation, invisible to everyone else. They saw a trend before it became obvious. They asked questions others ignored. They waited while everyone rushed. They moved while everyone hesitated. From the outside, it looks effortless. From the inside, it was strategic. As the old saying goes, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Most people hear that quote and think it's about productivity. It isn't. It's about perspective. Strategic people think in years. Reactive people think in hours. That's why one builds a legacy, while the other keeps chasing urgency. Have you ever noticed how exhausted everyone seems lately? Not physically, mentally. People are drowning in information, yet starving for wisdom. Because information tells you what happened. Strategy tells you what happens next. And those are two completely different skills. But the dangerous part isn't what you think. The dangerous part is that reacting feels productive. It feels responsible. It feels necessary. When your phone vibrates, answer it. When someone criticizes you, defend yourself. When fear appears, avoid the risk. Everything feels urgent. But urgency is often an illusion. The strategist understands something most people never learn. Not every decision deserves an immediate answer. Sometimes the most intelligent move is to pause, observe, collect information, allow emotion to settle. Because clarity rarely arrives in chaos. It arrives after silence. What happens if you keep living reactively? 5 years pass, then 10. One day you wake up and realize you've been incredibly busy building a life you never consciously chose. That's the hidden tragedy, not failure, unconscious success. Climbing the wrong mountain perfectly. Think about that. Imagine spending decades becoming exceptional at something you never actually wanted. That possibility should make anyone uncomfortable, because success without direction is just another form of failure. But here's the hopeful part. Awareness changes everything. The moment you recognize the pattern, you're no longer trapped by it. The moment you begin questioning your automatic reactions, you begin reclaiming your future. You don't have to know every answer. You simply have to stop accepting every impulse as truth. Because strategy isn't about predicting the future. It's about refusing to become a prisoner of the present. And that's where this journey truly begins. Not by learning new tactics, but by seeing your own mind differently. Because before you can think 5 moves ahead, you first have to understand why you've been thinking only 1 move at a time. And once you see that, you'll never look at your decisions the same way again. There is a dangerous illusion almost everyone believes, that the biggest decisions in life happen only a few times. Choosing a career, getting married, starting a business, moving to another city. Those feel like life's defining moments, but they aren't. The decisions that shape your future rarely arrive with dramatic music. They arrive quietly, hidden inside ordinary days. One extra hour scrolling instead of learning. One uncomfortable conversation you keep avoiding. One opportunity you dismiss because the timing doesn't feel perfect. One habit you repeat without questioning it. None of these moments seem important until years later. That's when you realize your life wasn't changed by one giant decision. It was changed by thousands of invisible ones. Think about a ship crossing the ocean. If its direction changes by only 1 degree, no one notices at first. The passengers feel nothing. The ocean looks exactly the same. But after weeks, that tiny shift leads to an entirely different destination. Human life follows the same law. Tiny decisions, massive consequences. And this is where most people destroy themselves. They judge decisions by immediate results, not by long-term consequences. If something feels good today, they assume it's the right choice. If something feels uncomfortable, they assume it's the wrong one. But strategy asks a completely different question. What happens next? And then, what happens after that? Most people stop thinking after the first consequence. Strategic people keep going. Imagine someone receiving their first paycheck. One person buys things they don't need. The purchase feels exciting, for a moment. Another person invests a small portion before spending anything. That decision feels less exciting, at first. Years later, those two emotions produce two completely different lives. The first person optimized for today. The second optimized for tomorrow. Neither decision felt life-changing, yet both quietly became identities. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something surprising. The future isn't created someday. It's being created right now. In every ordinary choice, every routine, every conversation, every habit, every excuse. We have been conditioned to believe that success comes from making brilliant decisions. Reality is far less glamorous. Success usually comes from refusing to make predictable mistakes. That's strategy. Avoiding obvious traps, thinking one step further, seeing what emotion refuses to see. Have you ever noticed how advertisements always promise instant rewards? Lose weight fast, get rich quickly, become successful overnight. Everything is built around immediacy, because the human brain naturally prefers immediate pleasure over future benefit. Psychologists call this present bias, but you don't need scientific terms to recognize it. You've lived it. Everyone has. You know exercising today creates a healthier future, but comfort whispers louder. You know saving money creates freedom, but impulse demands satisfaction. You know reading builds wisdom, but entertainment offers easier dopamine. The battle isn't between good and bad, it's between now and later. The dangerous part isn't what you think. The dangerous part is that short-term thinking often looks successful until the bill arrives. Debt feels harmless until interest compounds. Stress feels manageable until burnout appears. Poor health feels invisible until the diagnosis comes. Broken trust feels repairable until the relationship ends. Life compounds everything, both wisdom and foolishness. That's why strategists become obsessed with consequences. Not because they're pessimistic, because they're realistic. In my own reflection on this pattern, I've noticed that mature people don't ask, "What do I want right now?" They ask, "What kind of life is this decision quietly building?" That single question changes everything. Suddenly, late nights aren't just about staying awake. They're about tomorrow's energy. Money isn't just about spending, it's about future freedom. Friendships aren't just about fun. They're about the people shaping your thinking. Everything becomes connected. Everything becomes part of a larger system. As the old saying goes, a river cuts through rock not because of power, but because of persistence. Small choices, repeated consistently, become destiny. Think about that. Destiny isn't waiting for you somewhere in the future. You're creating it today, whether you're paying attention or not. But here's the good news. The same principle that quietly destroys lives can quietly transform them. One better habit, one wiser decision, one thoughtful pause before reacting, one investment in yourself, repeated long enough, they begin changing everything. And once you understand this, you stop chasing dramatic breakthroughs. You begin respecting ordinary decisions, because ordinary decisions create extraordinary lives. But this raises an even bigger question. If every choice creates another consequence, how do you learn to see beyond the obvious? How does some people notice outcomes years before everyone else? That's where the strategist separates from the crowd. Because the next lesson isn't about making faster decisions, it's about seeing further than everyone else can. And once you learn that skill, you'll never look at a decision the same way again. Most people believe intelligence is about having the right answers. It isn't. Real intelligence begins when you start asking better questions. Because every decision has two lives. The first life is the one everyone sees. The second life is the one almost nobody thinks about. Imagine dropping a single stone into a still lake. The stone disappears within seconds, but the ripples keep traveling, far beyond where your eyes are focused. Every decision works exactly the same way. There's the obvious consequence, and then there are the ripples. Most people only see the stone. Strategists watch the ripples. That's the difference. Have you ever noticed this? Someone receives a promotion. Everyone celebrates. More money, more status, a bigger office. It looks like a perfect decision. But a strategist asks another question. What does this promotion cost? More hours, less family time, higher stress, less freedom. Suddenly, the decision looks completely different. Not because the promotion is bad, because every opportunity carries a hidden price. And this is where most people destroy themselves. They only calculate what they gain. They never calculate what they give away. Every yes is secretly a no to something else. Say yes to endless work, and you may be saying no to your health. Say yes to comfort, and you're saying no to growth. Say yes to fitting in, and you may be saying no to becoming yourself. Life is built on invisible trade-offs. The question isn't whether you'll make them. The question is whether you'll notice them. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something profound. Every successful person has learned to think beyond the first reward. They've trained themselves to ask, and then what? A new car? And then what? A bigger paycheck? And then what? More followers? And then what? Because if your thinking stops at the first outcome, your future stops there too. This way of thinking has a name: second-order thinking. It simply means looking beyond the obvious, looking beyond today, looking beyond emotion, looking beyond convenience. It's the habit of asking, what happens because this happens? Again and again, until the hidden consequences reveal themselves. Think about social media. The first-order reward is obvious: entertainment, connection, a quick escape from boredom. But what's the second-order consequence? A shorter attention span, constant comparison, less patience, more distraction. Now imagine reading a book instead. The first-order consequence feels almost disappointing. No excitement, no instant reward, no dopamine rush. But what's the second-order consequence? Deeper thinking, better decisions, greater focus, a mind that's harder to manipulate. The first decision feels better. The second decision builds a better life. Because the real problem was never on the surface. The real problem is that our brains naturally chase immediate rewards while ignoring invisible costs. We've been conditioned to believe that if something feels good now, it must be good. Reality rarely works that way. Many things that feel amazing today create regret tomorrow, and many things that feel uncomfortable today create freedom later. Exercise, discipline, honest conversations, learning difficult skills, saving money, they all ask for discomfort up front, but they quietly pay dividends for years. The opposite is also true. Comfort now often sends an invoice later. In my own reflection on this pattern, I've realized something fascinating. The people who build extraordinary lives aren't necessarily making better decisions every day. They're simply asking one more question than everyone else. Before they act, they pause. Before they buy, they think. Before they react, they imagine the ripple effect. That single pause changes everything. As the old saying goes, a wise man thinks of the end before he begins. Not because he fears the future, because he respects it. Imagine two people standing at a crossroads. One chooses the path that looks easier. The other chooses the path that looks wiser. For the first few miles, their journeys appear almost identical. But years later, one is trapped by the consequences of convenience. The other is liberated by the rewards of discipline. That's how life works. The biggest differences rarely appear immediately. They appear after time has done its work. Time is the great amplifier. It magnifies every habit, every decision, every excuse, every discipline. Everything compounds. Think about it. A single decision rarely changes your life overnight, but repeated thinking patterns always do. That's why strategy isn't really about making perfect decisions. It's about building a mind that consistently thinks beyond the obvious. And once that becomes your identity, life begins to look completely different. You stop asking, "What's the fastest way?" You begin asking, "What's the wisest way?" You stop asking, "What do I feel?" You begin asking, "What will this create?" And that's where real power begins. Not in knowing more, but in seeing further. Because the dangerous part isn't what you think. The greatest enemy of good judgment isn't ignorance. It's emotion. The strongest strategy in the world can disappear the moment emotion takes control. And that's exactly where our journey leads next. Because before you can master decisions, you have to understand why even brilliant people make terrible choices. Most people believe bad decisions happen because people don't know enough. But that's rarely true. More often, bad decisions happen because emotions speak louder than logic. Think about the smartest person you've ever met. Chances are, they've still made decisions they later regretted. Not because they lacked intelligence, because, for a brief moment, emotion hijacked reason. Have you ever noticed how calm advice always sounds obvious after the situation is over? When a friend is going through a breakup, you can clearly see what they should do. When someone else is making a terrible financial decision, the answer seems obvious. But when it's your own heart, your own money, your own future, clarity suddenly disappears. Why? Because emotion changes perception. It doesn't change reality. It changes what reality looks like. And this is where most people destroy themselves. They mistake emotional certainty for truth. Fear whispers, "Don't take the risk." Pride whispers, "Never admit you're wrong." Anger whispers, "Say something you'll regret." Envy whispers, "You deserve what they have." And the frightening part is, every one of those voices sounds convincing. In the moment, they feel like wisdom, but they aren't. They're survival instincts wearing expensive clothes. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something unsettling. Your brain has two jobs. The first is to keep you alive. The second is to help you grow. The problem is, those two goals often disagree. Growth requires uncertainty. Your brain prefers certainty. Growth requires failure. Your brain avoids pain. Growth requires change. Your brain loves familiarity. So every time you're about to become a better version of yourself, part of your mind quietly tries to pull you backward. Not because it's evil, because it's ancient. Thousands of years ago, playing it safe increased your chances of survival. Today, playing it safe often guarantees an average life. The world changed. Your biology didn't. Think about public speaking. To the rational mind, it's simply talking. To the emotional brain, it feels like danger. Your heart races, your hands sweat, your thoughts scatter. Nothing dangerous is actually happening, yet your body reacts as if your life is at risk. That's the power of emotion. It creates a reality that isn't there. But the dangerous part isn't what you think. The dangerous part is that successful people experience these emotions too. They simply refuse to let emotions make the final decision. That's the difference. Not less fear, more discipline. Not less doubt, more awareness. Not fewer emotions, better leadership. Because emotions make excellent advisors, they make terrible leaders. Imagine a ship crossing the Atlantic. Emotions are like the wind. Sometimes they're behind you, sometimes they're against you. A wise captain doesn't try to eliminate the wind. He simply refuses to surrender the steering wheel. Most people do the opposite. The moment anger appears, they give it control. The moment fear appears, they change direction. The moment excitement appears, they abandon caution. Their emotions become the captain. Their future becomes unpredictable. In my own reflection on this pattern, I've noticed something fascinating. Every decision becomes easier when you separate the feeling from the fact. Instead of asking, "What do I feel?" ask, "What do I know?" Those 6 words have saved people from countless mistakes. Fear may tell you everyone will judge you, but what do you actually know? Anxiety may tell you you'll fail, but what evidence actually exists? Excitement may tell you to say yes immediately, but what happens if you sleep on it? Suddenly, emotion loses its illusion of certainty, and logic quietly returns. As the old saying goes, he who conquers himself is greater than he who conquers a city. Most people think that quote is about discipline. It's deeper than that. It's about leadership. leading your own mind before trying to lead your life, because every external victory begins with an internal one. Have you ever noticed how the greatest regrets usually begin with one sentence? I wasn't thinking. Exactly. You were feeling. And there's a difference. Feelings create urgency. Thinking creates clarity. One demands action, the other demands understanding. Strategists know this. That's why they create space before important decisions. A walk, a night's sleep, silence, distance. Not because they are indecisive, because clarity rarely arrives in emotional noise. It arrives after the storm settles. Imagine making every important decision only after your strongest emotion has passed. How many arguments would disappear? How much money would be saved? How many relationships would survive? How many dreams would finally begin? Think about that. The quality of your future isn't determined by the intensity of your emotions. It's determined by your ability to lead them. Because once emotion becomes your servant instead of your master, your decisions begin to change. And when your decisions change, your life quietly follows. But this raises an even deeper question. If every decision is connected to everything else, how do you stop seeing life as isolated moments and begin seeing the invisible system underneath it all? Because that's where ordinary thinking ends and true strategic thinking begins. Most people think life is a collection of separate events. A bad morning, a missed opportunity, a broken relationship. Each problem feels isolated, unrelated, random. But reality doesn't work that way. Nothing exists by itself. Everything is connected. Like threads in an invisible web. Pull one, and something far away begins to move. Think about a forest. When one tree falls, it changes the sunlight, the temperature, the soil, the insects, the birds, even the growth of trees standing hundreds of feet away. One event, thousands of consequences. Human life works exactly the same way. The challenge is, most people only notice what's directly in front of them. They see the tree. They never see the forest. And this is where most people destroy themselves. They try solving symptoms instead of systems. They change jobs without changing habits. They end relationships without changing communication. They chase more money without changing how they think about money. The scenery changes. The pattern survives. Have you ever noticed someone who seems to repeat the same problems over and over? Different partner, same heartbreak. Different company, same frustration. Different city, same loneliness. Different opportunity, same disappointment. At first, it looks like bad luck, but look closer. The environment keeps changing. The system doesn't. Because wherever your mind goes, your patterns quietly follow. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something uncomfortable. Most people don't have outcome problems. They have system problems. A person doesn't become unhealthy overnight. It's the system. Small choices, repeated daily. A business rarely fails because of one terrible decision. It fails because tiny problems were ignored for too long. Trust doesn't disappear in a single moment. It slowly erodes, one broken promise at a time. Everything compounds, not just money, behavior, thoughts, relationships, character. The dangerous part isn't what you think. The dangerous part is that systems are almost invisible. You don't wake up one morning and notice a broken routine. You don't immediately see a weakening relationship. You don't recognize a declining mindset after one difficult day. The change is subtle. So subtle that most people ignore it until the results become impossible to ignore. Think about a leaking pipe. One drop seems meaningless. Another drop, still harmless. Weeks pass, months pass. Eventually, the entire ceiling collapses. Everyone calls it sudden, but it wasn't sudden. It was ignored. Life follows the same principle. Every ignored habit, every ignored conversation, every ignored warning quietly builds tomorrow. That's why strategists pay attention to small signals, not because they're paranoid, because they understand patterns. Patterns always whisper before they scream. In my own reflection on this pattern, I've realized something fascinating. Successful people don't spend most of their time solving problems. They spend their time designing systems that prevent problems from happening in the first place. They don't depend on motivation. They build routines. They don't depend on memory. They build processes. They don't depend on luck. They build preparation. That's the difference. Average thinking asks, how do I fix this? Strategic thinking asks, what created this? Those are completely different questions. One treats symptoms. The other transforms causes. As the old saying goes, if you want different fruit, stop watering the same roots. Think about your own life. What patterns keep repeating? The same excuses, the same fears, the same arguments, the same financial stress, the same procrastination. Now ask yourself something deeper. Are those really separate problems? Or are they different branches growing from the same root? Because once you discover the root, everything else begins to make sense. Imagine trying to remove weeds by cutting only the leaves. They always grow back. Why? Because the root is still alive. Human behavior is no different. Until the thinking changes, the outcome rarely does. Most people spend years decorating their lives. Very few rebuild the foundation. And foundations determine everything. The strongest building in the world can collapse if it's standing on weak ground. The same is true for ambition, talent, discipline, even confidence. Without the right system, they eventually break under pressure. But here's the beautiful part. When you improve the system, you don't have to force every result. The results begin taking care of themselves. A healthy system creates healthy habits. A healthy mindset creates healthier decisions. Healthy decisions create a healthier future. One change, many consequences. That's how strategists think. Not event by event, but pattern by pattern, system by system. Because the real problem was never the individual moment. It was the invisible structure creating those moments. And once you learn to see the structure, life stops feeling random. It starts making sense. But there is still one obstacle powerful enough to destroy even the best system. One force capable of turning brilliant strategies into terrible decisions. It's invisible. It's deeply human. And almost everyone underestimates it. The inability to remain emotionally disciplined when life refuses to follow the plan. That's where our journey goes next. Because strategy without emotional discipline is nothing more than a good idea waiting to fall apart. Most people don't fail because they don't have a plan. They fail because they abandon the plan the moment life becomes uncomfortable. Think about it. Almost everyone knows what they should do. Exercise, save money, read more, spend less time online, be present with family, Take the difficult opportunity. Start the business. Have the honest conversation. The knowledge isn't missing. What's missing is emotional discipline. Because knowing the path and staying on it are two completely different skills. Have you ever noticed how quickly emotions can rewrite your priorities? One bad day, and discipline suddenly feels unnecessary. One criticism, and confidence disappears. One unexpected setback, and months of progress begin to feel meaningless. Nothing outside actually changed. Only your emotional state did. Yet that single shift becomes powerful enough to change your future. And this is where most people destroy themselves. They confuse temporary emotions with permanent truth. A difficult morning becomes, "My life is falling apart." One rejection becomes, "I'm not good enough." One failure becomes, "I'll never succeed." It's incredible how fast the mind can build a lifelong story from a single moment. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something profound. Your emotions are designed to help you survive the present. They were never designed to predict your future. Fear doesn't know your potential. Doubt doesn't know your capability. Stress doesn't know what's possible 5 years from now. They only know one thing: protect yourself. Avoid uncertainty. Stay where it's familiar. And while that instinct once kept human beings alive, today it quietly keeps millions from becoming who they were meant to be. Think about an airplane flying through turbulence. Passengers panic, the plane shakes, everything feels dangerous. But inside the cockpit, the pilot doesn't argue with the turbulence. He doesn't become emotional. He trusts the instruments more than his feelings. That's emotional discipline. Not pretending the turbulence isn't real, choosing not to let it control the direction. Life is full of turbulence. Unexpected bills, career setbacks, health scares, disappointments. Moments when nothing goes according to plan. The question isn't whether turbulence will arrive. It always does. The question is, who's flying your plane? Your emotions or your principles? Because the real problem was never on the surface. The real problem is that most people make permanent decisions during temporary emotional storms. They quit careers during moments of frustration. They end meaningful relationships during moments of anger. They abandon dreams during moments of fear. Later, when the emotion fades, they're left living with decisions that never should have been made. The dangerous part isn't what you think. It's that emotions are incredibly convincing. Fear sounds responsible. Comfort sounds reasonable. Procrastination sounds harmless. Self-doubt sounds realistic. That's why emotional discipline isn't about eliminating emotions. It's about questioning them before obeying them. In my own reflection on this pattern, I've noticed something interesting. The strongest people I've ever met weren't fearless. Far from it. They felt pressure. They experienced uncertainty. They questioned themselves. But they had one habit that separated them from everyone else. They refused to make important decisions in emotional moments. They waited. They reflected. They allowed the storm to pass before choosing a direction. That single habit protected them from countless mistakes. As the old saying goes, Never make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. Simple, but incredibly difficult to practice. Because modern life encourages the opposite. Everything is instant. Instant replies, instant purchases, instant opinions, instant reactions. The faster you respond, the more the world rewards you. But strategy doesn't reward speed. It rewards clarity. Have you ever wondered why chess grandmasters sometimes spend 10 minutes thinking about a single move? It's not because they're slow. It's because they understand the cost of one careless decision. Life deserves the same respect. One conversation can change a relationship. One investment can change your finances. One habit can change your health. One decision can redirect your future. Why rush what has the power to shape your life? Imagine becoming the kind of person who no longer reacts immediately. Criticism arrives. You pause. Opportunity appears. You evaluate. Fear whispers. You listen, but you don't surrender. That's what emotional discipline looks like. Calm under pressure, clear in uncertainty, steady when others become reactive. Most people never realize this until it's too late. Success isn't built during moments of motivation. It's built during moments when motivation disappears and discipline quietly takes over. Because motivation is emotional. Discipline is intentional. Motivation asks, do I feel like doing this today? Discipline asks, who am I becoming if I don't? That question changes everything. The strategist understands that identity is built one decision at a time. Not the easy decisions, the difficult ones, the invisible ones, the ones nobody applauds. Because those are the moments that shape character. And character quietly shapes destiny. But even emotional discipline isn't the final step. There's one last transformation. One shift that separates ordinary thinkers from extraordinary strategists. It isn't about controlling today's emotions. It's about building a life that still makes sense 10 years from now. Because the greatest strategists don't simply think differently. They live differently. They stop chasing quick victories and begin playing a game most people never realize exists. The long game. Most people are obsessed with winning today. Very few people are building a life they'll still be proud of 10 years from now. That's the difference between reacting and strategizing. Think about the tallest oak tree you've ever seen. It didn't become extraordinary because it grew faster than every other tree. It became extraordinary because it kept growing, long after the others stopped. The same principle quietly governs every meaningful life. The greatest victories aren't dramatic. They're patient. They're invisible. They're built while everyone else is chasing shortcuts. Have you ever noticed how our culture celebrates speed, fast success, fast wealth, fast fame, fast results? Everything is designed to make waiting feel like failure. But nature doesn't work that way. A masterpiece takes time. A meaningful relationship takes time. Wisdom takes time. Trust takes time. Character takes time. Yet somehow, we expect our lives to be different. And this is where most people destroy themselves. They sacrifice what lasts for what feels good now. They trade long-term peace for short-term pleasure. They trade deep relationships for temporary attention. They trade meaningful work for quick rewards. At first, the trade feels worth it, until one day, they wake up surrounded by everything they wanted and nothing they truly needed. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something profound. Time is the only investment that never negotiates. It moves forward, whether you're intentional or distracted, whether you're growing or standing still. Every single day, time quietly asks the same question. What are you becoming? Not, what are you achieving? Because achievement can disappear. Identity remains. The dangerous part isn't what you think. The dangerous part is that short-term rewards are loud. Long-term rewards are silent. No one applauds you for reading tonight. No one celebrates your consistency. No one notices the mornings you wake up early. No one sees the difficult choices you quietly make. Until years later, when everyone suddenly calls you lucky. But luck has very little to do with it. What people call luck is usually invisible consistency. Think about compound interest. The first few years look almost disappointing. Very little changes, very little grows. Many people quit because they can't see the progress. Then something remarkable happens. Growth begins accelerating. The same principle applies to your thinking, your habits, your relationships, your reputation. Everything valuable compounds, both good and bad. Ignore your health for 10 years and the bill eventually arrives. Invest in your health for 10 years and the reward quietly arrives too. The same law governs every area of life. Because the real problem was never on the surface. The real problem is that humans naturally underestimate compounding. We overestimate what can happen in 1 month and underestimate what can happen in 10 years. That's why people chase breakthroughs while strategists build foundations. Foundations rarely look impressive until the storm arrives. In my own reflection on this pattern, I've realized something fascinating. The people I admire most rarely live dramatic lives. Their greatness isn't built on extraordinary moments. It's built on ordinary decisions made with extraordinary consistency. They protect their attention. They protect their health. They protect their reputation. They protect their character. Not because they're perfect, because they understand that everything compounds. As the old saying goes, a society grows great when people plant trees whose shade they know they may never sit under. That's long game thinking. Doing today's work for tomorrow's reward. Making today's sacrifice for someone you'll become years from now. Imagine meeting yourself 10 years from today. Would that future version thank you or question your choices? Would they be grateful for your discipline or burdened by your distractions? Think about that, because every decision you make today is introducing you to that future person. Most people never realize this until it's too late. Your future isn't waiting somewhere ahead. It's quietly being built by the person you choose to become today. Not through one heroic act, but through thousands of ordinary ones. That's why strategists don't become obsessed with outcomes. They become obsessed with direction. Because if your direction is right, time becomes your greatest ally. And once time starts working for you instead of against you, everything begins to change. Success no longer feels rushed. Confidence no longer depends on applause. Peace no longer depends on perfect circumstances. You stop asking, how fast can I get there? You begin asking, am I becoming the kind of person who belongs there? That question changes everything. Because the greatest strategy was never about defeating other people. It was always about becoming someone your future can trust. And that brings us to the final realization. The lesson hidden beneath every decision, every habit, every sacrifice, and every strategy. The realization that transforms strategic thinking into a completely different way of living. There comes a point in every person's life when they stop asking, "How do I win?" and begin asking, "Who am I becoming?" That question changes everything. Because life was never just a series of decisions. It was always a process of becoming. Think about the person you were 5 years ago, the fears that kept you awake, the opinions that controlled you, the problems that felt impossible. Some of those things don't even matter anymore. Not because the world changed, because you did. Growth quietly changes the meaning of everything. And that's the hidden truth behind every great strategist. They don't simply predict the future, they prepare themselves for it. Have you ever noticed this? Two people can face the exact same challenge. One sees the end, the other sees the beginning. One asks, "Why is this happening to me?" The other asks, "What is this preparing me for?" The situation is identical. The mindset is not. And mindset quietly becomes destiny. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something profound. Every decision you've ever made has been shaping one thing far more important than your results: your identity. Every promise you keep to yourself becomes evidence. Every difficult conversation you choose not to avoid becomes evidence. Every distraction you resist becomes evidence. Every uncomfortable action you take becomes evidence. Evidence that you are becoming someone you can trust. And trust is the foundation of every extraordinary life. Because the real problem was never on the surface. The real problem was believing success was something you achieve. Success is someone you become. Long before the money arrives, you become disciplined. Long before respect arrives, you become respectable. Long before opportunities appear, you become prepared. The world usually notices the reward. It rarely notices the transformation that created it. The dangerous part isn't what you think. Most people spend their entire lives chasing outcomes without realizing that outcomes eventually disappear. Money comes and goes. Titles change. Companies rise and fall. Fame fades. Even success has an expiration date. But character compounds forever. No recession can steal it. No criticism can erase it. No failure can destroy it. Because once character becomes your strategy, every setback becomes an education. Every mistake becomes information. Every obstacle becomes another move on the board. In my own reflection on this pattern, I've realized that the people who leave the greatest impact on the world aren't obsessed with looking successful. They're obsessed with becoming wiser, calmer, more disciplined, more intentional. Every year they become a slightly better thinker, a slightly better listener, a slightly better leader. The improvements are almost invisible until one day they're living a life that looks extraordinary to everyone else. Not because they found a secret, because they respected time. As the old saying goes, the best chess players don't win because they make brilliant moves. They win because they make fewer unnecessary mistakes. Life works exactly the same way. You don't need perfect decisions. You need consistent ones. You don't need extraordinary motivation. You need ordinary discipline. You don't need to control the future. You need to control today's choices. Think about that. If you made just one wiser decision every single day, Who would you become after 1 year? After 5 years? After 10? Most people underestimate how powerful consistency really is. Not because consistency is exciting, because it's quiet. It asks for patience. It asks for trust. It asks you to believe in results that haven't appeared yet. But that's exactly what separates the strategist from everyone else. The strategist understands that today's invisible effort becomes tomorrow's visible success. So before this journey ends, leave yourself with one final question. When your future self looks back at the decisions you're making today, will they smile with gratitude or wish you had started sooner? Don't answer too quickly. Sit with that question, because the quality of your future depends on the honesty of your answer. If this conversation challenged the way you think, don't let it end here. Take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who is constantly making decisions but has never been taught how to think strategically. And if you're ready to explore the deeper psychology behind discipline, human behavior, decision-making, purpose, and the invisible patterns shaping your life, subscribe to Listen Beyond and continue this journey through the playlist. Until next time, don't chase faster decisions. Build a wiser mind. Because in the end, the greatest strategy isn't learning how to predict the future. It's becoming the kind of person who can create one.